Welcome on into the Utah Blockcast. I'm Steve Bartle, Utah Insider for KSL Sports. Good to be back on the Blockcast. Sorry for the delay getting this recorded. Forgot my audio equipment, so I'm an idiot. I spaced it. That's my bad. So here I am on a Friday, 2 days after Big 12 Media Days ended, with a recap of Big 12 Media Days. So I appreciate everybody for tuning in and supporting the Blockcast. Obviously, it means a lot to me, and I'm excited for what's coming with the Utah Blockcast. But was down in Frisco, Texas. It was a lot of fun and plenty to discuss. You know, there wasn't anything super noteworthy or new breaking news or anything like that, but I do think there were some, insights to sort of pick apart and some things to talk about from the 2 days and all of that. But first, I want to start by acknowledging the barbecue scene down there in Texas. I've always been a Terry Blacks fan, and as I typically have with myself or with others, and including family, and specifically Kendra. Whenever we go to Texas, one of our first stops is typically Terry Blacks. But, man, let me tell you this. We went to Hutchins Barbecue out there in Frisco, and my goodness, what an experience. Oh, man, delightful. Just incredible. The best plate of barbecue I've ever had. Just a tremendous product out there in Frisco with Hutchins Barbecue. The Texas Twinkie, oh my gosh. I fell in love all over again. Sorry, Kendra. I still love you, obviously, but that Texas Twinkie, something special, man. And so appreciate everybody for the recommendation of Hutchins Barbecue is great. I actually ate there twice. So shout out to the Utah media folks that accompanied me. Obviously, Josh Furlong, Sammy Mora, Joe Coles were accompanying me in the experience. That was our first night there, and then I went again with KSL Sports, Mitch Harper, and Tanner Tripp, who also had a similar experience. So it was great, man. Can't recommend it enough. I am certainly excited to continue my barbecue escapades and all of that. Certainly it should be fun to experience getting out to Kansas this season. People have talked about Kansas barbecue, talked it up quite a bit, so expectations will be high. But man, shout out to Hutchins Barbecue. It was incredible, and the only way to start the podcast recapping my trip down to Frisco. So let's get into Big 12 Media Days and what we learned, what we can take away from the event. And so just sort of set the scene, obviously a 2-day event. They split it up with 8 teams on day 1 and the other 8 teams on day 2, which was Tuesday and Wednesday. Brett Yormark hit the stage on day 1, sharing comments and giving his state of the address of the Big 12, kind of giving us a status report on the conference and its outlook. And there wasn't anything super significant. He continued to hit on all the hits with the Big 12, and I think it continued to emphasize the message of wanting to earn it, the competitive balance in the league, the 5+11 playoff format, and those were the big talking points throughout the 2 days. Was maintaining competitive balance, a level playing field, the talent specifically at quarterback. Those were pretty consistent topics throughout the 2 days, and I think that's kind of where it should be. I think Brett Yormark and what he's done with the Big 12. Obviously, he continues to push the commercial opportunities with the announcement of the WWE and SmackDown actually traveling to campuses for SmackDown events prior to game days, and Utah will host one of those SmackDown events. And I know there are some WWE fans that listen to the Blockcast. So shout out to you guys that are fired up about that. So that'll be pretty interesting. And again, just the way to keep the Big 12 in the headlines is how I view that. So beyond that, nothing really new in terms of the media rights and all that. But the Big 12 will begin its new media rights deal, a 6-year deal that begins this season, worth over $2 billion. And the announcement this go around was the addition of TNT to the broadcast plan, as well as the digital arm Bleacher Report under TNT, which was a pretty significant had a pretty significant presence there at Big 12 Media Days. There was a lot of video interviews with with Bleacher Report and their team, and that was really interesting to see that and add that to the dynamic. But we will have games on TNT this season, so that'll be interesting to see how it what sort of games end up being on that. Typically the best games have ended up on ESPN and Fox, but maybe with TNT that just gives the Big 12 some additional, a new avenue to primetime slots, and I think that could be an interesting route for the Big 12 to look into, is getting maybe some of their bigger games on that TNT network in primetime slots, if that's going to be an option. So we'll learn more about TNT's coverage and Bleacher Report's coverage this season, but that was probably the most noteworthy thing in terms of the media rights and streaming strategy of the Big 12. But I do think a key point that Brett Yormark talked about, in his address of the conference, was the competitiveness, the competitive balance, the parity, all of those things that he talked about last year. But more specifically, the quarterback position. I think this is something that, should be the leading message of the Big 12 this season, is the quarterback play, is the returning starters, the guys with all the production coming back. The Big 12 has a number of guys that should be viewed as top quarterbacks in the country this year. And obviously there are going to be guys that don't have the production that will certainly emerge, guys thinking along the lines of an Arch Manning in that. But I still think the Big 12 has a very strong crop of quarterbacks, and having done my quarterback rankings after, watching film and looking at stats of the quarterbacks in this league, I do think this is a good crop of quarterbacks. And, Sam Leavitt, Avery Johnson, those guys still headline this league. Obviously, with Leavitt, leading the Sun Devils to the Big 12 championship last year. Avery Johnson, still considered the most talented quarterback in the league. I think a lot of people are anticipating him taking a step forward in his game, having that year under his belt last season and leading the Wildcats to success. I think that was represented in On3's anonymous vote of the Big 12 among Big 12 coaches. Kansas State and Iowa State were picked as the two teams to make it to the Big 12 championship this season, and I think that is largely due to Avery Johnson and what the Wildcats and Chris Kleiman have done to surround Avery Johnson with improved options at the skill position. So, those two are the headliners, but there's a lot of depth in this league this season in terms of who's coming back. Obviously, Josh Hoover, Sawyer Robertson at Baylor and TCU, respectively. Bayron Morton is a guy that Coach McGuire, who got a lot of airtime this year, given what they've done in terms of the investment in that program, and I'll talk more about that later on. But Bayron Morton is another good quarterback in this league. And then you look beyond that in who's coming into this league, and it potentially adds to the strength of quarterback play in the Big 12 with Devin Dampier coming in, Caden Salter, Connor Weigman, 3 transfers that I think are coming into the league with varying levels, but all of them are coming to the league with high expectations in terms of what they're going to do for their respective programs. So I think, again, highlighting the quarterbacks in this league is going to be important, and it's going to be up to these quarterbacks, these signal callers, to live up to it, to play at a high level, and to lead their respective programs to success. I think that's going to be the key, because the big message this year was around the college football playoff format and the desire for the 5+11 format, which again is the 5 automatic bids for the conference winners and then 11 at-large bids. And Yormark talked about it, wanting to earn it on the field, and I think highlighting the quarterbacks and their play a significant role in the Big 12 conference's chances at securing multiple bids this year. So we want quarterbacks to live up to that, and we want specifically Devin Dampier to live up to the expectations, because as I transition to more of a Utah-centric takeaway segment here, Devin Dampier was the guy that I think had a lot of interest. A lot of people were significantly excited and interested to hear from Devin Dampier. And I think Devin came into this with the right personality to make a strong impression. I thought he was very charismatic. He was very engaging with the media. He took each and every question in stride and answered it, with a confidence that was sort of an undertone, in his responses. He was very, like I said, energetic, positive, and just had fun with this event and with this opportunity to represent Utah, at Big 12 Media Days. But still, I think there's a lot of intrigue around Dampier going into this season. I was talking with a handful of national media members on threes, Ari Wasserman, and Andy Stokes as well. ESPN's Adam Rittenberg both talked about kind of their interest in Devin Dampier this season. Ari Wasserman talked about, he said, this is going to be appointment television for me. And he is a guy that firmly believes in Dampier's ability to come to Utah, given the fact that he's working in the same offense that he did at New Mexico, and make a significant impact for Utah in this Big 12 race. So, there was, I thought Devin Dampier coming to this event, and, I was super interested in seeing how he handled it. I thought he exceeded expectations in terms of, the sort of impression that he made. And, he talked highly of Utah's outlook and how they're feeling going into the season. I think there is a lot of genuine excitement, amongst these guys for the season to get going. But Dampier was also mindful of, the rest of the conference and showing respect to the rest of the conference. And, when he was asked about making the transition to a higher level of competition in the Big 12, Dampier, acknowledged that this is, it has been a bit of an adjustment. And he talked about seeing it and feeling it and going through that adjustment in practice, first and foremost. And I think we have to remember, Utah, they're going at it in practice, right? Utah was one of the top defenses in the league last year, despite all the struggles. And that was a pretty consistent message of Kyle Whittingham, who just, again, praised the consistency of the defense and all of that. But, we got to remember that Devin Dampier is going up against that defense, on a pretty consistent basis this offseason. And he acknowledged the fact that, it was a bit of a learning curve. There was that in terms of making that adjustment, adjusting to the speed of the game, the speed and size of the game, and his need to improve, his processing and decision making. And I think having that sort of confidence to acknowledge that, to speak to that, I think is a good sign. So, I was impressed with Devin Dampier. Again, he was a pretty hot topic amongst people that I talked to, and everybody wanted to talk with Dampier this year. So beyond Dampier and his presence there at Big 12 Media Days, there were some other significant notes for Utah football. obviously with Kyle Whittingham taking the stage for his press conference to kick things off. He if you had a bingo card, there were a number of things that he said that I'm sure were marked off on the bingo card. And obviously, with Jason Beck taking over complete autonomy for him in terms of calling the offense, that is something that Utah fans have heard over the years from from Coach Whittingham. But I do think this is something that, given the situation with Devin Dampier following Jason Beck to Utah from New Mexico, that there's a bit more validity to it in the sense that Dampier's experience in the system, there's an understanding between Beck and Dampier. There's a trust level that just wasn't available, for previous offensive coordinators and situations as they come in and were also promised full autonomy in how they operate their offense. So I do think, given the fact that there is that history between Beck and Dampier, that there's a bit more validity. But obviously, as he said, as Kyle Whittingham said it himself, well, we've got to allow the rubber to hit the road and get into the season and see how things go. So I think I do think there is validity to what he's saying, that Beck will have autonomy to run the offense as he sees fits. And there were a couple little hints at what sort of differences we could see throughout the day, or this season for Utah on the offense throughout the day from Kyle Whittingham. In his presser, he talked about he sort of snuck this in there, but he talked about the command that Dampier has in the huddle, and then he slipped in, but we're not going to huddle all that much this year. And I thought that was pretty sly from Coach Whittingham. And then there were a couple other things. He basically said, Utah is going to be a carbon copy of the New Mexico offense and how it operated there in Albuquerque, which is a good thing when you're talking about an offensive coordinator coming from that past location and wanting him to have autonomy to run the offense his way. So it'll be interesting to see what that sort of looks like. It sounds like we're going to see some no huddle. Sounds like there were a couple other things that he talked about, but I do think there's a bit more validity to what he's saying there with the autonomy for Jason Beck. And perhaps the most interesting little nugget that he shared with us, that he revealed to the media, was Lander Barton and Smith Snowden getting the opportunity to see offensive snaps this year, with Lander Barton playing tight end and Smith Snowden playing receiver. I think that is a pretty exciting development potentially for Utah. Lander has taken reps in practice over the last 2 seasons at tight end. He's had special packages, which we haven't seen, but he has had work at the tight end position, very minimally, but it is something that they've worked on over the last couple seasons, is Lander Barton at tight end. And I think, I remember going to a Brighton game, and I still have the photo somewhere. I'll probably tweet it out in the next day or so, but he's got some ball skills. He can go up and get it. And I remember going back to, some of the 7-on-7 events that Barton competed in, and he was dominant as a pass catcher. Just went up over everybody, was more athletic, bigger, faster, stronger than the competition. But there are skills there for Utah to tap into offensively. He's got legitimate ball skills that I think could offer, a pretty unique layer and opportunity for Beck to exploit. And then, with Smith Snowden, it makes all the sense in the world to give him some opportunities on the offensive side of the ball. We watched him take kickoff returns. We saw the athleticism. We saw his vision and feel and playmaking. I think that's a great way for Utah to maximize Snowden this year. And I think it makes a lot of sense to give him some opportunities just to get the ball in his hand and allow him the freedom to potentially, create some big plays. So, Whittingham talked about the need of maximizing their best players. And I think having them established, as with Snowden being CB1 this year and the top dog in the defensive secondary, Lander Barton obviously being the guy that he is on that, at linebacker, having those guys established on that side of the ball first and foremost allows them to take on some responsibilities on the other side of the ball, which, I think this is encouraging as well when you talk about, embracing two-way players, because you're recruiting a couple guys this cycle specifically that have that potential as well. And the first player that will come to mind is the number one player in the state, Celesi Moa, whose his big focus is having two-way opportunities at the next level. And that is something that Utah is providing him in their recruitment. They're recruiting him primarily as a receiver, but he's got all the defensive instincts and qualities that you love to see. He's got the twitch, he's got the fluidity, he's got the willingness to throw his body around and be physical, be tenacious in that sense. And so Utah's done it before with Sione Vaki playing two ways. They've done it with linemen in the past as well. And so, they have experience. I'm not saying that they have the blueprint, but they have experience with two-way players, and they've done it before in the past. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see just how often those guys get some snaps on the offensive side of the ball. But, from my point of view, I think it makes all the sense in the world to give them opportunities on the offensive end. So, that was probably the most interesting thing to come of the comments is the two-way opportunities for those two players. But something that I think is important to share is obviously Keanu Tanavasa, former Blockcast member. We crossed him off the list, obviously, and all that. But he had some comments, made some comments that I think obviously now with the quotes available were a little misconstrued and in that. And I think it's unfortunate what's come of this, but obviously Tanuvasa and Keanu, I had the opportunity to talk with him a couple times at media days, and it was, for me personally, it was good to catch up with him. And he's had a lot of life events that have changed his life. He got married this offseason, but I think in terms of how things went down over the last 10 months, right? Going back to the season, going back to our episode where he pleaded with Utah fans to stay bought in, getting into the month of December when he recommitted to the program, announcing his Utah man am I and all of that, to then hit the portal a couple weeks later and transfer to rival BYU. You understand why Utah fans have felt the way that they felt. That feels like a genuine betrayal, and so there's a lot that Utah fans can draw from to fuel the hatred and that. And I think, however, Coach Whittingham put it rather simply, and I think it's an important thing to take away for Utah fans moving forward. Is the most important thing you can do is just move on. I think that is that's the key, because again, Tanavasa, he gave a lot to the program in his time here. Obviously, it sucks that things went down the way that they did, and I know that Keanu, if he could go back, he would do it different. He would do it a lot different, to say the least. And so, but he gave a lot to the program, and so you appreciate his efforts. It's unfortunate that essentially the bridge has been burned down with this decision. But I do know that he appreciates his time with Utah and all that. You don't have to love him, you don't have to compliment him, but just move on. I think that's the big message for Coach Whittingham. He said, and an old experienced coach once told me, you win with the players you got. You don't worry about the players you don't have. And I think that should be the focus for Utah fans moving forward, is let's focus on the guys in the program, the guys that are going to be contributing this year. Utah's got a number of key cogs that'll be valuable, along the defensive line. Aliki Vimahi, Jonah Lea'ea, And then Dallas Vakalahi, I think obviously everybody is looking at him to be a sort of breakout star this year. He statistically performed quite well last season, especially the fact given the fact that he returned from his mission just 3 months prior to the season kicking off. There should be a lot of optimism about Dallas Vakalahi going into year 2 with the program this season. And then I think there should be a good amount of optimism in the young guys that they've brought in. And obviously it's tough to rely on freshmen, but that's what they've done in the past with a guy, Tanuvasa, Junior Tafuna, and others. I think Dallas Vakalahi last year, right? I think, Utah brought in a number of young defensive linemen that will be the tackles, the linemen that will carry on the tradition, moving forward. But a couple of them, at the very least, are going to be relied on this season. And I look at, Carson Kafusi as one. He spent the offseason with the program, going through winter workouts and spring ball. I look at Dylan Battle, the transfer from LSU, who's a true freshman who went through spring ball with LSU. And then I look at a guy like Semi Tawalunga, who came here from Mater Dei, who I think is going to be just an absolute treat to watch this season. Go back and watch his film. He's just an absolute wrecking ball. And I think Utah needs those guys to emerge and step up and contribute this season. But I think there should be some optimism around that. So that's what I've got. Obviously, plenty more to digest from from Media Days, and I'll have plenty of content coming over the next couple of weeks from my conversations at Media Days. But wanted to get this recorded just to get it done and out of the way. I'm going to have more Utah Blockcast episodes coming here pretty shortly. I'm excited about the future of the podcast. It's going to be evolving here in the next month or so, and excited about that as well. So appreciate everybody for tuning in, and more to come from Steve Burrell and the Utah Blockcast.